it please the court? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, on May 29th, 2012, early morning hours, Michelle Knockby, a daughter, a sister, a wife, a mother of two beautiful children. She got up early, went to work. She went earlier than normal because every other Monday she did payroll for the company she worked for, Thermo Fisher Scientific. She rolled in around 10 minutes to 6, and the first thing she did is she enters what they call a man door. You're going to hear a lot about the man door. Enters the man door, and she goes to gather up the time cards. You'll learn that most of the employees there have a swipe card method for clocking in, but temporaries and contractors, such as the defendant, Mr. Dooley, use time cards. Jeff, next slide. And that's this device over here. Typically, the time cards are kept by the employees over here. This picture was taken that day, okay? The reason there's only one time card there is because Michelle had already gathered them up. Okay. She goes through that door. She goes up some steps to a second story office space. She shared that space with two other people. They wouldn't be showing up for another hour or two, so she was there alone. She went to her office, which she kept locked. Go ahead, Jeff. This is her office right here. This is her office door that she kept locked. She kept it locked because previously someone had tried to break into it. Okay? She never had an opportunity to unlock that door. What we estimate to be about 6 to 6:01 a.m., she was beaten. And she was beaten badly. We believe the attack started here, this first pool of blood right here. She was beaten. Her hands were bound behind her back with packaging tape. A plastic bag was taken over her head, a plastic bag that we believe was taken from the women's room. Go ahead, Jeff. Right here. See the pool here? Plastic bag was taken out of this, placed over her head. She was then dragged about 40 feet, pooling blood all the way to this door. This door leads to what's called the mezzanine area. Jeff? She was taken through this door, taken to the right, and laid to rest on a filthy warehouse floor where the only thing she could do was die. There were some total of 9 people in the warehouse at that time. Go ahead. Michelle shared the second floor with a supervisor named Ed Yuska. His office is right back here, and this is Michelle's. And then further down the hall was the facility manager, Tom Seaman. Again, they weren't there yet. But around 7 o'clock, Ed shows up, and he notices, go ahead, Jeff, this spot. So he calls the head maintenance supervisor, a guy named Roger Hibner. Roger, what's going on? Something's up here. So Roger shows up, and Roger actually thinks it's grease because they use a brown, reddish grease at the facility. Thought maybe one of their grease guns had spilled out on the floor. Nevertheless, Ed makes the decision to call down to the floor, the first floor of the warehouse, and talk to the supervisor there, Kenny Hicks. Kenny, any of your people hurt? No. Everybody there? Yes. Cleaning services for this warehouse was done by the defendant, David Dooley, and his wife. They were not employees of Thermo Fisher Scientific. They were contractors. They used those punch cards I was telling you about earlier. Okay? On this particular day, David Dooley arrived at 5 a.m., so about an hour before Michelle. And that's not unusual. Okay? He would usually get there, clean up the break room, offices, and move his way out to the warehouse. So when the defendant is called up, he says, well, that wasn't there this morning when he cleaned. I want you to focus on what I just said. It wasn't there this morning when he cleaned. You're going to hear evidence during the course of this trial. This place hadn't been cleaned yet. Rather, we think Mr. Dooley was doing something else. Along with Mr. Dooley, Ed, the one who called down to see if everyone was okay, leaves his office, and they check this restroom, and then they check this restroom down here. They're looking around to see what this could be. What is the source of this stain? And eventually, Jeff, they come into the mezzanine area. Ed goes to his right. The defendant goes to the left. Ed sees Michelle, and it is very clear to him she is deceased. He grabs David by the arm. They go back through this door. Jeff, go ahead. And they go back to Ed's office and call the police. You'll hear that 911 call here very shortly. This is Thermo Fisher Scientific. It's massive. 3 to 4 warehouse football fields. Okay? It's actually more than one facility. All of this is Thermo Fisher. This back here is Beckman Coulter. And now there's a wall, but at the time there was a fence that divided the two businesses. These are tractor trailers, so that gives you any idea of just how big this facility is. The office space was right around here, and then this mezzanine area is right here. You'll see graphs and drawings and all that, and we're going to ask the judge if we can do a site inspection so you can see it with your own eyes. Police arrive, and they tell everyone, go ahead, Jeff, to get to this lobby area. All the employees to the lobby, all right? They question them, they inspect them, they look at their clothes, they're looking for blood, they're looking for defensive wounds, offensive wounds. They take pictures of the bottoms of their feet. Perhaps most importantly, they tell everyone, what did you do today? Walk me through this day. And everyone's like, it's just a normal day. I'm parking my same spot. You're going to learn these people. Many of them have been there for 30 years. The average tenure there is like 22 years. People love working there. And they are creatures of habit. And they say, I did the same thing I do every morning. I parked in my same spot. I sat in my car, drank my coffee. I went in through the man door, and I started working. You'll hear that they have these, what they're called RF guns. They scan the inventory. So as inventory comes in, they scan it, goes on shelves. As it goes out, it gets scanned. It really is a well-run machine. And these people have been there for years. And they all just recount their day. David Dooley recounted his day. He cleaned here, he cleaned there, he was out at the warehouse. Okay. He appeared clean and neat. He was wearing what appeared to be high-end running shoes. Thermo Fisher Scientific, go ahead, Jeff. Well, I'll say this. When the police showed up, they had a crime scene, a massive crime scene. They knew they had a lot on their hands. Go ahead. But Thermo Fisher does not have surveillance cameras. Beckman Coulter, they do now. Beckman Coulter did. Specifically, they had cameras here and here. There was a police officer from the Boone County Sheriff's Office did part-time security work for Beckman Coulter. He knew that. So he went to Beckman Coulter the day of the murder. So they're working this. The day of the murder, he gathers up the surveillance footage. What does he see? Well, there's everybody coming to work. Okay, everybody checks off. About 30 minutes after Michelle's death, about 6:30 in the morning, guess who's seen leaving? David Dooley. And he's not just leaving. He parks here. He should go out here. That's the way he goes. We looked at a month of surveillance. He goes in and out this way every single time. But at 6:30 in the morning, 30 minutes after Michelle Mockbee had been beaten to death, he gets in his truck and he goes all the way around here. Think he didn't want to be seen? Go ahead, Jeff. This is a still of David Dooley's truck going behind Thermo Fisher and Beckman Coulter. Now, go ahead, Jeff. Now, the police reached this conclusion. And ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case is going to be, I think you're going to be satisfied. Whoever did this left. Items that were used in Michelle's murder to this day have never been found at that warehouse. Items like the tape gun that bound her wrists. Items like the blade that cut her wrists, which I forgot to mention. Her wrists were cut. Her skull was fractured. Some blunt object was used to beat her to death. These items were never recovered. They go to Mr. Dooley's house, and he confirms, oh yeah, I did leave. Why did you leave? My wife wasn't feeling well. Okay. They go back to Thermo Fisher and they interview some of the other employees. Did you see David Dooley leave? Was one of the questions that was asked. One of the guys who unloads the trucks first thing in the morning, is a guy named Joe Seeger. Joe Seeger said, yeah, he did leave, because I saw him when he came back. And it was kind of weird, because he never talks to me, but he made it a point. He came up, he walked up to my car and said, went home because I ripped my pants. Okay, so if you're keeping track, in the first interview, David Dooley makes no mention that he went home. When there's undisputed proof that he left, he acknowledges, oh yeah, I did leave. To a coworker, oh no, and I went home because my wife wasn't feeling well. And to a coworker, he went home because he ripped his pants. We're up to 3. Now, you're going to hear a lot about forensic evidence in this case. The crime scene unit, I think, is very good here, and they took this scene and they started wide and they worked their way in. They took prints of the dust to find footprints. They dusted the walls all around Michelle's office where the scene of the attack started, looking for fingerprints. They swabbed and they swabbed and they swabbed and they swabbed to try to get DNA evidence. Interestingly enough, such a dusty, dirty warehouse makes it actually harder to get prints. And we're going to have someone that's going to come and explain why that is. But there were no conclusive footprints or fingerprints found in this case. There wasn't any real conclusive DNA in this case. We think a good reason for that is the person who committed this crime was wearing latex gloves, which he wore when he cleaned. Not likely to get fingerprints on things. Not likely to get trace DNA on things. And yet we still have this. Michelle Mockbee was, go ahead, Jeff, was drugged down a 40-foot hallway, a rug. You will hear from multiple witnesses. When you drag someone, it allows trace DNA to get all over them. Skin cells contain DNA. Hair contains DNA. It gets embedded in carpet, and when someone is drugged, particularly with the force of the weight of their body being drugged against the carpet, there's going to be lots of DNA profiles. On Michelle's shirt alone, there were several DNA profiles. We never could identify all of them. Her husband's DNA was on her shirt. Her DNA was on her shirt. And a profile from which he can't be excluded was also found on her shirt. It's not a strong match. I don't want to oversell the DNA to you. Okay? About 1 in 8 people have the profile that was found, and he's one of them. But the trash bag that was on her head, a much stronger match to David Dooley. So there will be DNA evidence in this case. Now, go ahead, Jeff. These are the time cards. This is what the temps use. This is what the Dooleys use. Let me tell you a little bit about their arrangement. Janet Dooley was given a salary, $1,200 or $1,400 a month, to clean the break room and the offices. David punched in and was paid hourly to clean the warehouse. If and only if Janet helped in the warehouse could she punch in. But here's what they were doing. Dave would get to work with no Janet, punch them both in, and then do her job while they're both on the clock. That's called triple dipping if you're keeping count. They're getting paid the salary and 2 hourly wages to do the job. Janet's getting paid a salary for it. Go ahead, Jeff. Take a look at this. And I don't know if you can see it from back there. This is just one day, May 25th, so 4 days before Michelle's murder. Dave arrives at 4:48. He clocks in at 4:49. Janet arrives at 7:30 a.m. and is clocked in at 5:56. Let me repeat that. She arrives at 7:30, but she's clocked in at 7:56. And that's on a day where we actually see her car show up. What you're going to hear from the employees there, the weeks leading up to Michelle's murder, Janet was almost never there. Maybe 1 or 2 days a week. Wait, when we tell them she's clocked in go ahead, Jeff. She's clocked in every single working day in May. I don't believe it. No, she wasn't there. So here's what's happening. Janet Dooley's being paid for not being there. David Dooley's being paid to do Janet's job, and they're getting a salary. Why is this important? Michelle Mockbee is the human resources officer for this facility. She checked payroll, and she was doing payroll that morning. When she showed up, she would have gathered the time cards and looked at them and said, there's Dave, there's Janet. There's Dave doing Janet's job. There's no Janet. Yet again, Janet's not here. We think this very well could be the impetus for the assault. The Dooleys were busted. To give a little bit of credence to this, wouldn't it help to know if we had that punch card from Janet punched in that day and the punch card from Dave punched in, showing them both punched in? You'd like to have that, wouldn't you? Guess what? It was never found. To this day, it's never been found. It wasn't in Michelle's stuff when she gathered up the time cards. It wasn't in the time card slot that I showed you, that second slide. It wasn't in David Dooley's janitor closet. And it wasn't found in his house. The punch cards that would show they were working that day went missing. We believe the killer realized, this is why I killed her. I need to take this evidence with me. I need to take the razor blade that I cut her wrist with. I need to take the tape gun that I bound her hands with, and I need to get out of here. And those items were never found. And then there's this. This is Michelle Mockbee's office door, the one she kept locked. This are fresh pry marks of someone trying to get into her office. You're going to hear that there were some old marks there from about 4 or 5 months before, but these are fresh, okay? The people who work there did not see that the week before. The people who work up there, like, that wasn't there the Friday before. Go ahead, Jeff. This is the aluminum door sill, okay? So where the wood door goes up against this. What they were able to do is they were able to take this forensic, it's like putty, all right, like silly putty. And they line it along this door because there's marks here. And they're able to get an impression. Go ahead. Here's what the putty looks like whenever it's laid out. And they're able to see, okay, we've got a wedge mark here, we've got a wedge mark here, we've got a wedge mark here. Go ahead. Here's a close-up. So we see this wedge mark. It's about 9/10 of a centimeter wide. It is the head of a flathead screwdriver, but not just any flathead screwdriver, a flathead screwdriver that has grooves. A prime type screwdriver. Okay? Go ahead. This is David Dooley's janitor's closet. When they searched his closet, they found a screwdriver. Not in a toolbox, not in a drawer, up in a cupboard with a knife, hiding behind a stack of urinal cakes. And ladies, they're things that are thrown in men's restrooms to make things smell better, I guess. Behind a stack of those. Not in a toolbox. Behind the stack of urinal cakes. Suspicious? You bet. So much so that the detectives put it out so that those could be photographed. But they did more than photograph them. Go ahead, Jeff. They sent it to the Kentucky State Police Lab. This is a number 2 flathead screwdriver with grooves. Now look at this. Go ahead. 9/10 of a centimeter wide. Let's go back. There you go. 9/10 of a centimeter wide. Go ahead. There's a couple other things I want to touch on. Because you're going to hear about it, and you should hear about it, okay? Dan Mockbee, Michelle's husband, they, by all accounts, had a loving, caring relationship. There's no history of domestic violence, okay? But he was looked at, as you would. Michelle Mockbee wasn't in a gang. She wasn't a drug dealer. So you start looking at, all right, does she have a husband? Because that's our first suspect. Dan Mockbee was vetted, okay? He was looked at. Dan Mockbee worked at Thermo Fisher Scientific with Michelle as a supervisor. That's where they met. This place was like a family. He was off work that day. I mentioned they had 2 little girls. He was going to spend time with the girls for a few days. He was at home. He's getting phone calls from some of his employees who can't get to work because the police have blocked off the driveway. So he's like, well, what's going on? And he's calling and texting his wife, hey, baby, you okay? Phone call after phone call is not being answered. He gets in his car and he drives there. And he's told that his wife's been murdered. And he acted appropriately. He was absolutely distraught. Signed every consent form that was thrown in front of him. Search my house, search my computers, search me, search my van. He acted very appropriately. Many of the people there were very sad too. Exactly one person was described by the people who worked there as being fidgety and nervous. That person's David Dooley. You're going to learn that Dan Mockbee made about $700,000 in life insurance. They had a lot of life insurance on each other. But I think you'll be satisfied. You're going to learn he's bad with money. You're going to hear that they were in debt. They had some credit card debt, substantial credit card debt. You're going to hear that they weren't great with money. Dan's still not great with money. But I think you'll be satisfied that he was not there. He didn't go to the place where he works where everyone would recognize him and beat his wife to death. I think, too, it's fair to say that there were some mistakes made or maybe some things that could have been done better in the course of this investigation. One of the lead detectives used a handheld recorder that gave him fits the first day of interviews. It would stop and start. He would replace the batteries. And we've confirmed that with witnesses. Or yeah, he kept fidgeting with that recorder. It kept beeping and it wasn't working. And so he took notes of the interviews like they did before there were recorders. Okay, so detective work was done before we had handled recorders, and it was done in this case to a degree. I don't know if it's so much of a mistake of law enforcement, so much as it is a failure of equipment. So it goes. But there is a mistake that was made that I think, and I know that the Boone County Sheriff's Office will accept. I mentioned that Michelle had a bag around her head. It became saturated with blood. And when things become saturated with blood, it makes it more difficult to extract someone else's DNA because there's so much DNA in blood and there's so much blood in that bag. So what they did is they cut around the portions that they're like, this is the best part of the bag that we can test. They took 2 large pieces of the bag, but where there was the mass amount of pooling of blood, where they didn't think they could get that much DNA, they did not test. They did not collect, they did not test it. And they will be the first to admit, even if we didn't test it, we should have collected it. Okay? That was missed. That was a mistake that they made. You're going to learn about the limitations of our Kentucky State Police Lab. In my voir dire, I always go over the CSI effect and how it looks so great on TV. But how it plays out in real life is this. You may want to swab every doorknob and every spot of blood and everywhere you think there may be an offender's DNA. And you have 200 swabs at the end of it. The lab's going to tell you may submit 10. So you submit the 10 best you got. And then you wait, not a week, not a month, but frequently more than a year to get those results back. And sometimes you get the results back and they say, it's inconclusive. You can maybe do some other type of testing, but we don't do that. And now you're going to have to pay a lot of money to go to one of these boutique private labs. And that happened in this case. That happened in this case. An outside lab was utilized. You're going to learn all about this from the witnesses, and I think it's going to be a very educational experience in that regard. At the close of this case, I believe that you will be satisfied that whoever committed this murder left. Items used in the murder of Michelle Mockbee were taken from the scene and never recovered. Whoever did it would have had blood on them, on their clothes and on their boots, and they had to change and come back. Only one person left, and that's David Dooley. The one person with motive, David Dooley. Every arrow is going to point to David Dooley. And at the close of this case, we're going to ask that you return a verdict of guilty for murder and tampering with